Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this evening. I'd like to extend a warm welcome on behalf of SIWEM and the Republic of Ireland branch to what is now our third, if not actually our fourth session on our webinar series looking at Ireland's initiatives for sustainability with respect to climate action. Tonight's session focuses on end of waste status and circular economy with particular emphasis on the construction sector. And we're going to look at a case study of sorts, co-presented by Golder Associates and Integrated Material Solutions. They'll describe their roles in implementing and delivering Ireland's flagship project with respect to end of waste and circular economy, with particular emphasis on recycled concrete aggregates. But before we kind of get into the case study, we'll hear from Griffin of the EPA and the role that organisation played in developing guidance around end of waste processes, how it came to pass, and how it's intended to be implemented at a practical level. So it promises to be a really engaging evening. I hope you'll all take something away from it. Please engage, ask questions through the Q&A function on your Zoom screens, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can at the back end of the presentations. There's a couple of housekeeping items before we get into the presentations. Firstly, this will be recorded as we do with all our presentations, and it should be available on the SIWEM website and our YouTube channels. If you do experience any technical issues throughout the presentations, please drop a line via the chat function, and Barbara, who's working in the background there, will try and get to it as quickly as she can. Any questions you might have which are specifically related to the presentations, please put them into the Q&A function, and as I said, we'll get through them as quickly as we can. And this session goes towards your continuous professional development if you are recording it. Be an hour accredited towards that. We don't provide CPD certificates, but suffice to say that it's a good learning opportunity for everyone, and I'm sure you'll get something from it. So I'm conscious that we only have an hour to get through these presentations. I'll speak a little bit more about SIWEM and what the branch is doing after as part of the closing comments. But I think without further ado, we'll get into it, and I'll introduce our first speaker, Griffin of the Environmental Protection Agency. Roisin is a senior inspector with the EPA and a subject matter specialist on end of waste and circular economy. Roisin is going to take us through, I suppose, the whole process of end of waste and circular economy with respect to construction, from the perspective of the regulatory body and all that entails. So, Roisin, whenever you're ready to go, I'll stop sharing and you can take the floor.
Sure, thanks. No. Just bear with me one moment there. Now, hopefully you're seeing something there now. That's okay there, folks?
Yeah, that's good for me.
Great, Tara, thanks a million. Great, yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to speak here and keep up communication with you all. It's a very fast-moving area. So my name is Roisin, and I'd like to think that I'm the senior inspector, but no, Katrina Collins will be our senior inspector, and I'm a member of a team of 4 inspectors and the circular economy regulatory team, if you like. So Dara has asked me to speak a bit about the concept of end of waste, and there's lots of new information and legislation and guidance now available for those wishing to either just learn more about the area or indeed to prepare and submit an end of waste application. So I've tried to keep the slides simple, but they are a bit heavy on text, but hopefully you can use them as a reference, and you're going to have to listen to me go on a little bit about the topics, but there are links to guidance within it as well. So
Rosie, could you just expand the screen, because you've got the sidebars and we can see the PowerPoint.
okay, is this the screen that you're seeing, guys? I've just expanded. I have
You've still got all the notes.
Okay, it's just using the wrong screen there, apologies. Try and move that. Is it using the right screen for you now, folks? You still have the working?
No, still it's not in slideshow mode.
Okay, what I might do is I'll just switch off my camera, sorry now, and my screens might work better a little bit for you there, guys. Yeah, it's always the way. I just did it perfectly there a second ago.
I can see it anyway, Roisin. It seems to be big enough. I think if you want to go on it, it's not too bad once you enlarge it.
If you click on resume slideshow.
Yeah, I think I can, because I have the presentation up on one screen and it just won't pick the right screen. That's my problem, unfortunately. Sorry. So listen, I'll maximize it. I'm just trying to minimize there because the little zoom.
You've got use presenter view.
There.
On the right hand side.
Yeah, that's all fine. Yeah, it's in the normal presenter mode for me, so I'm just not quite sure. Is there any other little troubleshoots I can do? Sorry about this now, folks. From current slide, beginning.
On the Zoom facility, you should be able to have, there's a couple of buttons which can actually then put it into full screen.
Yeah, tried that there a second ago. Okay, I might just try share again now, folks. Sorry about that. What I'll do is that's no use for you there, guys, is it? It's still not the right full screen.
It's not on at all.
Oh, okay. I'm having no luck today. Sorry now. Now, how does it look now for you? Second.
Not seeing anything shared there, unfortunately.
No. So I'm doing exactly everything I had done there a couple of minutes ago. Didn't seem to like it. Okay, try it one more time and I might come back offline and come in again to you.
Yeah, I think even if you got it up as far as you can just share the screen on the PowerPoint, we could probably, I think it's enlarged enough that we can follow it through. Probably easy.
Okay, yeah.
Share.
I'll give it one more shot. Just.
No.
Yeah, I'd say run with that, Roshan. For me, it's big
Yeah.
enough anyway. I assume it's
Okay,
probably,
yeah, sorry about that. Now the screen just seems to be kind of switching on and off on me more so from a hardware thing here. So
On the bottom right hand corner of the screen, there is a projector screen icon.
yeah, that little one might do it for me.
well, we're in business.
Okay.
Except you've got the notes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pain.
So at the top, you should have display settings.
Yeah, my Zoom is just in on top of it there, sorry.
It says display. If you go to the top left
Sharing.
hand underneath.
On the Zoom there, Barbara? Or
Yes, it says display settings.
I don't quite see that now, sorry.
Just above your slide.
On the green screen sharing ribbon there, is it? Participants Q&A, pause share, annotation, remote control.
Might be hiding it.
Might be hiding it on me, yeah. You'll all be starving by the time we're finished, sorry. That's gone a bit freezing on me there now.
Have you got, there's also some buttons on the lower left-hand side of the screen.
Yeah, so I'm just going to try and move this slightly so that I can see all the ribbons.
That's it.
Okay, apologies guys. It's more my hardware. It's really sticky on my side. My apologies.
There we go.
Right, we have this.
I'll have to sing a song there or something to entertain you.
That's show business, all right.
That's not my forte, no. But anyway, listen. Thanks a million for your patience for that, and hopefully there can be some great editing done when we're doing the recording. So as I said, we were just heading into just talking what the team itself does. Our day-to-day role is to assess both the byproduct notifications and end of waste applications that are received through Regulation 27 and 28 of the Waste Directive regulations. The byproduct concept and notification system will be very familiar to some and others not so much, and I'll touch on it briefly as it's also an important route to know of for certain materials such as excess soil and stone. I've mentioned before that the two routes they've quite sisterly traits, the end of waste and byproduct. They sit side by side in the directive, but they are most definitely not twins, and there are very distinct differences between them. But it's actually nice to put end of waste under the spotlight this time around, as often both systems are kind of wedged together into the one presentation. So I'll cover a few bases and speak more about the definition of waste, and it's always a good place to start. Where does the concept of waste, end of waste, come from, and where does it now sit in our policy and regulation, and just how high up does it sit there? What does the process look like, and most importantly, what the application looks like practically, and what it needs to contain. So if we look at a simple definition, and we always say it's a simple definition with a lot of weight, it's any substance or object which the holder discards, intends, or is required to discard. So any three of those things, and you have a waste on your hands, and it's just something to always keep in mind when we're looking at this this terminology. So what does end of waste mean? I suppose the concept of end of waste was established in the European Waste Framework Directive, and it's been adopted in our domestic law through Article 28 of the Waste Directive regulations, and then further on amended back, I think, September there in 2020 when the directive was itself amended. And simply put, really, it's something, it's placed in the recital there, and I won't read it word for word, but it's in the highlighted section that I try and kind of remembers laying down end of waste criteria that provide a high level of environmental protection and an environmental and economic benefit. And construction demolition waste is in those possible categories of waste that are specifically mentioned. So just, it's something that, if you're not familiar with it, just to bear in mind, it's something that was a waste is no longer a waste as long as certain criteria are met. And just a reference as to where this information all sits, as I mentioned earlier, we have a 2008 directive, and from that our Irish regs in 2011, and that's where this kind of regulation 27 or 28, article 27, 28 was coined. And now we look to the regulations that followed on from 2018, and we have a little bit more meat on the bones of legislation that was fairly sparse at the time. So just some things to kind of keep in mind. On the left-hand side there, we speak of waste there in the bullet points, and it's important that it must be regulated at every stage. So at collection, transport, storage, and treatment, which it's costly because it's under a waste regime at all times. It remains classified as waste even after it's gone through its treatment process. Waste regulatory controls, they're for the benefit of environmental protection, and we keep in mind that whoever holds the waste is responsible under our Waste Management Act as the holder of the waste. So it's a very high bar to reach end of waste. It can only be achieved on demonstration of compliance with end of waste criteria. And again, it can only be achieved following an authorised waste treatment process. All of the environmental benefits of the waste regulatory controls cease to exist once that material is classed as no longer a waste. And this is a really high bar to reach for the applicant and very important criteria for the EPA to set, but it is attainable. The criteria is there to ensure environmental protection. The material can be used subject to normal controls after it leaves the waste regime. All other product standards and requirements and all other relevant legislation apply to that product. It's just left the waste regime element of its life. So what's the actual meat on the bones for regulation 28 in the legislation? Waste which has undergone a recycling or other recovery operation is considered to have ceased to be a waste if it complies with the following conditions. And we often call this the end of waste test, or 4 pillars as it referred to it in the guidance, and there are 4 really important conditions and you have to satisfy each of them. So the material must be used for specific purposes. You need to be able to state what you're going to use it for. And bearing in mind, I know we're concentrated on construction elements here, but it can be any item at all. So really do explain in the application what exactly you're going to use it for, because we won't be experts on absolutely, on everything, on every item. A market or demand exists for such a substance or object, and that's pretty, it's usually okay to be able to demonstrate because there's a financial gain to be had from it. The material fulfills the technical requirements for the specific purposes and meets the existing legislation and standards applicable to that product. So as I said, once that material leaves the waste realm, every technical requirement, whether it be an EN standard or harmonized standard, it could be a TII series, etc., for this particular area, they are all applicable to that product. The 4th pillar is one we spend quite a lot of time on, and it states that the object will not lead to overall adverse environmental or human health impact. So bearing in mind that this material was once a waste, this is the biggest transition into product, and this is the condition that's quite important. The new regulations include limit values for pollutants where necessary as well, which is also important to remember in your application. So just before I jump too far, just a couple of points to say, like to touch on the very relevant policy that we're all working to at the moment, and that's the Waste Action Plan for a Circular Economy, and that was published last year, which stemmed from the European Green Deal and elements of the Climate Action Plan, which focused heavily on sustainability and circularity. But as well as this, the first Circular Economy Bill, or the scheme, was just published there last month, which really paves the way to enable certain provisions for the future. I suppose I'm mentioning these items to show just how much resources are being put into these particular routes, such as end of waste and byproduct, just in case we were ever in doubt that end of waste is here and it's here to stay. And we all have the very best of intentions to operate in a more circular way and in a more environmentally friendly way. But it's very important that the industry goes down the right regulatory routes to do so. So just some information to keep to hand. There's 3 types of decisions, I suppose, three types of end of waste, and some are again more familiar than others, so bear with me. The first is the single case decision, where we spend a lot of our time, and this is for the benefit only of the operator to whom the decision is issued. So for example, IMS, that we'll hear of in a little while, they are the operator, and this decision belongs to them. And there are 7, if not 8, just about, decisions published by the EPA to date. So the second is the national level decision, and this is for the benefit of all operators or all the operators within a certain sector or industry to whom that decision applies. It's limited to the relevant member state, which is something to be mindful of. Being on the island of Ireland, it's not recognised in other jurisdictions. The difference with, I suppose, the decision-making process with this is that it just goes to Europe for a consultation and a notification as well. And the third, the EU level criteria, that they almost look after themselves, I suppose. They're for the benefit of all operators within the sector to whom the decision applies across all member states. So there's 3 of them that we have at the moment, and they're the glass colours you can just see there on the top right: iron, steel, and aluminium scrap. So that's what we have for across EU. Just included this slide just to give you an idea of the types of materials that have gone through the system, the end of waste system. So you can see there's 2 recycled aggregates decisions gone through in 2019, IMS, which you'll hear of later, and Starcy Holdings as well in 2019. And this just helps anyone who's it might seem a bit daunting when we go to submit an end of waste application, what happens. And I suppose at the top left there, what's quite helpful is that we're quite open to having a pre-application meeting and seeing what are the concerns you have. Once that application goes through, and I'll speak more about that form in a couple of moments, but the application is assigned the inspector, and there's a period of consultation, and it could be with a number of bodies, with the local authorities, with the NSAI. It could as well be with our own Office of Environmental Enforcement, because it could be a licensed site itself that is the applicant. It could be EPA licensed. Quite often there's an element of requesting further information from ourselves as well. So there isn't really a timeline on that. It depends on when the applicant comes back with their further information. And once satisfied, then the inspector will make a recommend a decision, and they'll give it to the board, and the board ultimately makes that decision. And there is a period just after that. It's a draft end of waste decision, and there is a period where you can make submissions. And once that report is considered by the agency, then the final end of waste decision itself is issued. So the only difference really between that and a national decision would be the consultation step I mentioned to Europe. Thankfully, we have some clarification help in the last year or two. We have some draft guidance issued, and it's in 2 parts really. The first part is the end of waste kind of general guidance document and the concept of end of waste, and it talks about the decision-making process, the 4 pillars that I spoke of, or the end of waste test that I spoke of earlier, and it gives you, it covers all end of waste, doesn't cover any specific material type as such, so it's quite broad in its approach. And then the second part is very much a guide for your material type, how to make it fit into the application form, what you might need to really demonstrate and show evidence in relation to those 4 conditions that you can meet an end of waste criteria. So this guidance goes hand in hand with the PDF online application form that we have, and those questions throughout the application form will guide you throughout. So while assessing some of these applications, there are some common information gaps that can pop up every so often. The first one there, it's sometimes, I suppose, overlooked in terms of the input. We look so much on the output coming out and the end of waste criteria, that the clarification of the exact waste inputs and waste acceptance criteria, it's really fundamental to the consistency and the quality of the finished product. And I think IMS, you might clarify later, I think it's just one list of waste code on that particular decision, Keen, but that'll show you just how uniform some of this material needs to be. And secondly, the clarification of proposed use scenarios for the output material. So the more detail, the better that you can give us, really, especially as I mentioned, it's not, it might not just be for the construction sector. So we need to know exactly what the proposed use scenarios. And that leads into, for that proposed use, what are the relevant standards, the technical standards, the product requirements, and what's the relevant legislation for that proposed use. And that's incredibly important. Demonstration of no overall adverse environmental or human health impact is often, there's a gap in the applications that come into us at times. Sometimes to say it just does fulfill certain standards and requirement, it might not be enough to get you over the line for the final condition in terms of overall adverse health and human impact. On the next slide, I just talk about that in a bit more detail there in the last condition. So to focus, this is just some screen grabs from section 4.5 of the guidance, and here, which actually speaks to two end of the waste pillars in relation to the technical requirements and the adverse environmental and health impact. So when you're looking on the left-hand side at your blue box there, when you're looking at the technical requirements, the left-hand side, it needs to be assessed within those standards or requirements whether these requirements are sufficient to also satisfy the fourth pillar relating to protecting against adverse human and environmental impact. And if the answer is yes, and if the standard speaks to that sufficiently, then there may not be a need for additional requirements. But if the answer is no, then it will be suitable to complete a risk assessment for your material, for your waste input that comes into you, and for what you want to put on the market to support your compliance with that fourth condition. That can include your own sampling, your own proposed pollutant limits, etc. So what's on hand? What are we up to in the agency, I suppose? What we have on hand, it's quite busy. There's 43 single case applications on hand. And again, they cover a wide range of materials, but as you can see, the clear most popular one there is that we have 19 on hand for aggregate material at the moment. And I'm conscious that some of these have been sitting there for a while and they haven't gotten much attention, and it's not really on purpose. But what the good thing, I suppose, is that there have been initial assessments conducted on 16 of those 19. And the reason that's the 16 is that we've had 3 come in there quite recently. So I do intend that those last 3 will be included in this general initial assessment project. So I suppose, to be honest about it, the strongest applications, the strongest ones that have the strongest applications have a better likelihood of being assessed and finalised. That's not to say that the applications that are weaker will be parked and won't be consulted on. They are being consulted on at the moment. And in the first instance, it's really to check if they want to continue with the application. And within that consult, it's to let them know that an initial assessment has been done, and based on the guidance and based on the application form, at the moment, it's not fit for purpose. And often it falls in terms of the fourth condition and the risk assessment that's required to make that decision. So in terms of the national applications we have on hand, we have 2 national applications for the aggregate material. And both of these are under active consultation. They've been with us for a while. Further information has been requested by the applicant for a variety of items, including the proposal of pollutant limits and the demonstration of that fourth condition, the environmental and human health impact. So there wasn't risk assessments adjoining them. So in order to make a national decision, we really need that robust risk assessment to be provided. So that's where those 2 national applications are with at the moment. That they're both back with the applicant. And it's important to say that, like, when an applicant puts in an application, it can be deemed confidential for them. So we don't really have to share it with other applicants. It belongs to the applicant alone. Just a couple of helpful documents as well. I'm conscious of time there and my fantastic intro into my presentation, so I won't keep you too much longer, but there is a couple of helpful documents that you can use for reference. Again, some more familiar than others. The Construction Demolition Waste Management Plan guidelines, they have come up in place of the older 2006 guidelines, and they have just been out for consultation. That's just closed. So the link is there if you want to go in and have a look at it there, and there's plenty more. Just the last 2 slides are just some links if you want to need more information. This was the study on the selection of a number of waste streams for end of waste assessment, and then there was a more particular report on end of waste criteria for this kind of aggregate material as well. So there's a lot of information in them. And I will leave it there for now, Dara. And our email is there. I'm here if you ever need us. There's at full complement. There's 4 of us there, along with Katrina, our senior inspector. And hopefully that was of some help to you.
Thanks very much, Roisin. That was a really good introduction. It tees it up nicely for the second part of the event. As I said at the outset, we're now going to look at an applied case study. And I suppose the collaborative pioneering project undertaken by Kohler Associates and IMS in delivering Ireland's first end of waste status project in the construction sector. Firstly, we'll hear from Martha Buckwater-Davies of Kohler. Martha is a geochemist who specialises in the characterization of mine and construction related waste material. Martha's got extensive experience working on waste projects throughout Ireland and indeed internationally. We'll hear about how the joint approach between Golder and IMS negotiated the end of waste status and the process involved in delivering this key and innovative project. So Martha, whenever you want to start, fire away.
Can you see, sorry, can you see my screen okay?
Martha,
Yeah.
if you go up to the top with display settings and click on there.
Yeah. What about it?
You need to click on there because at the moment we can see your notes.
Okay, yeah, that's weird. Because I told it to share screen too, so it shouldn't have done that, which is, okay, so sorry, what are you saying I should change then?
On the left-hand side, it says display settings. So you just want to, you go up, display settings, click on.
Maybe what I'm saying is different.
No, next to show taskbar, which you just clicked, is display settings. To your right.
I'm sorry, I don't have anything that says display settings.
Okay.
So I will, it's different, it appears.
Now we're just seeing all your.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's really weird because we went through this before and it didn't. Let's try. If I can do it without the notes, if I can hide the notes, maybe. I'll say no, don't use presenter view, and we'll try that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, grand.
It's not up. It's not up.
I don't have it yet. Sorry, Barbara. Or
I can't see anything.
I tried, Martha. Sorry to interrupt. Just pulling your whole PowerPoint over to the other screen, and then it might mirror it for you.
Yeah, okay, grand. Yeah.
I think that's what worked for me.
How's that?
Maybe just go into the slideshow from beginning.
That's better.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like it's swapped screen 1 and screen 2 anyway, so hopefully we'll get
We're
this
familiar with this
out.
problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So thanks for having me. Yeah, Martha Buckholder Davis from Golder, Ireland. Golder has been a member of WSP since April of this year, and together with my co-authors, I thought I'd talk to you about the process we went through to seek this end of waste application, which was completed before the guidance that Roisin outlined there. So if we sort of start by defining the problem, this is a Integrated Materials Solutions Limited is an inert construction and demolition waste landfill in North County, Dublin. As I'm sure you're all very aware, there's a construction boom in Ireland, and a key challenge for the construction sector is the availability of disposal outlets. And we have a recovery goal of 70% for non-hazardous construction and demolition waste. And the question that was posed was, okay, can we find a beneficial use for some of this waste? And there's a value in that, also that it allows for void space in the landfill to be sort of reserved for more non-recoverable waste streams. So Roisin's gone through this fairly well, but recycling essentially is the end of waste. We have European level criteria, but in this case, we were seeking to make an end of waste application, a bespoke end of waste application for this material that meets these 4 criteria, that waste can become a product. We started out with a literature review, and this literature review looked at how end of waste and recycled aggregates are handled in other European countries. France, Austria, and the Netherlands have drafted or published end of waste protocols for recycled aggregates that put leachate limits on such recycled aggregates, as well as total pollutant content. And some of these countries have other inputs as well as concrete. We were considering primarily concrete, but also things like brick, tile, glass, stone, recycled criteria for road planings, for asphalt, etc. And you can see here the French criteria does sort of an interesting thing where it considers different usages at different risk profiles. So they have different leachate limits put for emplacement in roadways that depends on proximity to the water table, for example, which becomes important, as we'll discuss later. The UK also has a quality protocol for aggregates from inert waste, but they don't have leachate limits. They carried out a generic risk assessment that considered a stockpile of recycled aggregates and its impact on groundwater and surface water. So we looked at this quality protocol, we looked at the European ones, and in our pre-consultation with the EPA, the view was taken that using this methodology that derives leachate limits was the preferred approach. So our sort of Bible text here that we ended up relying on quite a bit was this paper that on deriving end of waste criteria for aggregates, which basically says, I know this is a wall of text, but basically says, as Roisin mentioned, essentially, when an aggregate becomes a waste, reaches end of waste status, it becomes a product and it doesn't have protection anymore. So it's no longer regulated, the way that waste is regulated. So restrictions and control measures to protect the environment and human health in line with those end of waste criteria are required to ensure that the end of waste process does not compromise the safety of the environment. So our study started with generating and collecting recycled concrete aggregate samples. These were washed and unwashed, graded and ungraded samples. And we carried out European standard leach test methods and compared the results against groundwater criteria to identify priority contaminants that could potentially arise from the use of this material. So the hydrogeological risk assessment methodology used a process known as impact modeling, which essentially allows you to back calculate limit values from groundwater quality criteria. So if we look at the potential impact of leachate at a compliance point, and we don't want to exceed the groundwater quality criteria, we can back calculate to limit values for that leachate. We combine this with probabilistic risk assessment, which looks at using Monte Carlo simulations, which essentially repeats a lot of random variables. It runs basically many iterations for consideration of uncertainty and significance. This process together was used in a risk assessment modeling software known as ConSim, which was developed by Golder in the UK for the UK regulator. It is a commercially available product to assess the risk posed to groundwater by leaching of contaminants. So the ConSim works on a fixed conceptual model. It basically looks at leaching of material to pore water, and then processes that happen in the unsaturated zone and processes that happen in the saturated zone, including attenuation, advection dispersion, etc. So at each of these levels, the results are compared with an appropriate water quality standard. For our model, we built a source pathway receptor conceptual model, which considered the use of this material for the construction of roads. And the reason that was chosen is because that is probably the most common use for recycled concrete aggregates. So these conceptual models considered specific characteristics of Irish aquifers, covering the majority of sort of the Irish hydrogeological bedrock landscape, which is till and limestone, peat and limestone, peat till and limestone, and then our final scenario, scenario D there, considers just limestone, which essentially is the highest risk. There's no sort of attenuation processes happening in sort of a peat and till environment. So scenario D is kind of what we consider the highest risk profile. So with lots of computer runs here, we considered here, you can see like a borehole, a well that's 10 meters down gradient of the road. And we established maximum concentrations that would be allowable at the source. Basically, the leachate generated in the pore water of recycled concrete aggregates. And these maximum modeled concentrations for our priority contaminants were converted to limit values for 10-to-1 batch leach tests using a kappa value derived from literature, that Hilmar paper I referenced before. The kappa is essentially a kinetic constant that looks at basically concentration as a function of liquid to solid ratio. So what this does is we don't have to go measure the pore water in recycled concrete aggregates. We've converted it to the standard test method that's easily applicable and easily taken for material from any lab that we're working with. This is the standard test method for waste acceptance in Ireland anyway. So these limits we derived here, we essentially chose then the most conservative limit under our 4 scenarios. And you'll see in some places essentially there didn't derive a limit from the model, so we did end up choosing limit values from the Netherlands for some of our parameters. But we then compared our proposed limits to those of other European jurisdictions and found generally that they were broadly comparable, but again, we're considering this specifically for our unique geological environment. And so this was considered appropriate methodology in the way that these other jurisdictions derived their limits. So after the hydrogeological risk assessment piece was brought together, which is an important overall aspect of demonstrating it wouldn't cause environmental harm, we still have to consider all of the other factors, right? Does it meet, is there a demand for it? Does it meet a technical standard, et cetera? So we were looking at human health risk assessment, and we developed a conceptual site model specifically for the use of this material in roadways that looked at chronic and acute exposures, and concluded that there was no additional requirements for the use of this material compared to other aggregate products. Now, the quality protocol looks at, can it meet or does it meet a technical standard? This is essentially factory production controls, like any accredited aggregates business has to maintain. But this does require additional requirements because our end of waste decision says you have to carry out leachate testing on the aggregates you produce. You have to demonstrate that it's not contaminated with waste. You have to, maintain records of of how these aggregates are derived that inform the consumer, the purchaser of these aggregates. So our final process settled on restrictions and limitations, that it was only for use for roads, and that's because that's what we modeled. If we want to use it in other settings, we have to specifically consider their use in those settings and carry out appropriate risk assessment. Another restriction that was placed is that it's not for direct contact with ground or surface water, and that's because concrete does carry a risk of alkaline, high pH leachate, especially when saturated with water. We have leachate limits to be protective of the environment. There is limits placed for mineral oil that are in line with IMS's waste acceptance criteria, and these were considered acceptable given that the use of this material for roadway construction is overlaid with bituminous mixtures, essentially hydrocarbons. We also have limits on physical parameters to floating materials, metals, no contamination with soil or gypsum or wood. And that's to ensure that it is a product that meets a technical specification, that it's not contaminated with waste. And again, this final one is probably one of the most important ones when it comes up in discussion about this project is that this product is manufactured under authorization and it meets specification. So this recognizes that the recovery of, sorry, I don't know what happened here. The recovery of the material is an activity that requires a robust management system. Usually this is like, in this case, it's a waste license, but also waste permitted facilities, requires regulatory oversight. And also PN will walk you through their process of factory production and the process of accreditation with the standard authority, the NSAI in this case. So in conclusion, we have demonstrated that we met the conditions of end of waste. We probably don't need to explain too much that there is a demand for aggregates, in this booming construction environment, that a demand exists, that aggregates are commonly used, but we have demonstrated that it can fulfill technical requirements because the material has suitable engineering and mechanical properties. We prepared a quality protocol borrowing from the UK aggregates from inert waste protocol. And this process is happening under accredited factory control. And through risk assessment, we've demonstrated it will not lead to overall adverse environmental or human health impacts because there's a significant environmental impact of disposing of concrete. And this offers significant sustainability benefits when the alternative is considered, which is disposal of concrete in landfill and sourcing of virgin aggregates, and which are a finite resource, our quarries are. So I think this methodology is broadly applicable. I won't touch on too much here, but there's a lot of other waste streams that are considered suitable for end of waste. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Martha. Very interesting there. Kind of a natural progression from Roisin's presentation there. We're really kind of getting into the applied science, if you like, behind the end of waste process. So last but by no means least, Cian O'Hara of Integrated Material Solutions is going to bookend our event this evening. Cian comes from an environmental consultancy background, and like Martha, has vast experience in working on waste-related projects, particularly in the construction sector, and as his role as director of IMS continues to deliver sustainable solutions to the construction sector in Ireland. So Cian, whenever you're ready, you can share and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Dara. I take it I'm having the same problem and you're not seeing the presentation yet.
No, it's fine.
Oh, you can see it?
It looks fine, yeah.
Okay, I did the opposite of what I thought I should do and it seems to have worked.
Yeah, that's what it was. The screens were switched essentially.
Great stuff. Well, thanks for having me here. My name is Cian O'Hara. I'm a chartered member of the Institute and Managing Director of IMS. So glad to speak to you today about end of waste in practice. So I suppose quickly just about IMS. We were established in 2016 to be a market leader in waste management and resource recovery. We primarily deal with construction materials and other residual wastes. We're a service provider, so we want to provide relevant and complete solutions from waste through to now recycled material supply. We deal with materials from uncontaminated through to hazardous materials through third parties. Obviously, all our services are to be compliant, economical, use best available techniques. We're trying our best to work under circular economy principles and really to try and make waste management simple for our customers. So on the right there are some of the bodies that we interact with. Obviously, our regulator is the EPA. We work with the Department of Environment and Communications on a number of subgroups. We're members of Fédération Internationale de Recyclage, which is a kind of a global organization which has a lot of members in Northern Europe who have been recycling materials for probably 20 years, either through design, like in the Netherlands where they don't have many quarries, or in Switzerland where they have really embraced recycling a stone for a long time. We're also members of Chartered Institute of Waste Management, our industry body is the Irish Waste Management Association, which is a lot of waste contractors in Ireland, and then we're members of the Irish Green Building Council, and we are certified by the NSAI for our materials. So we're based in North Dublin. This is a picture of our quarry. So it's an inert landfill restoring a former quarry which used to produce shale and limestone. We're licensed to take in 50,000 tons of material per annum. We're the last engineered landfill in operation in County Dublin. There's one other inert landfill, Walshamstown in County Meath, and then there's 3 non-hazardous landfills, which take in primarily kind of household wastes or kind of more contaminated wastes. And so we've kind of gone from around 50 landfills in the 90s down to only the 5 left. So landfill void is a resource, and there's not any more of them going through the process. It's a long process to get consented, both planning and licensing. So you really have to kind of, I suppose, mind the landfill space that's there. Obviously, try and keep waste in circulation, and then keep the void for more contaminated materials. So we take in primarily into the void. We take in brownfield soil and stones, other C&D wastes, and then outside the void we take in restoration soils. So that'll be clean materials. This is our you can see that polished bank there. That's our mineral liner, and then we take in capping materials as well. And then we also have permission from the agency to take in Japanese knotweed contaminated soils for deep burial. So because we're an engineered landfill, we fall under the landfill directive and our waste license, which sets the parameters under which we operate. So we have a clay liner that has to meet specifications. We have defined WACC, which is the inert landfill WACC, and then we have increased limits around certain parameters. We have to carry out comprehensive waste acceptance testing procedures, and then environmental monitoring of the leachate within the landfill cells and the surrounding groundwater and surface water. Then we have Greenstone, which I'm primarily here to speak to you about today, and then we also assist with logistics and site clearance. So really with Greenstone, what we wanted to do was we were taking in a bit of concrete, I suppose in 2017, but not much, because really, like we were, like I said, trying to keep the landfill void for more contaminated material. So, but obviously on the sites we were working on, there was concrete being generated, and local authorities would generate loads every week. There's probably about 1 million tons of concrete generated in Ireland a year. The statistics are a bit delayed, you know, and some of it goes down byproduct routes, so it's hard to tell, but around about 1 million is what I reckon is produced a year. So what we were trying to do, I suppose, is take buildings and turn it back into products. So we wanted to give a new opportunity for waste producers to recycle the material either on the site of generation or off site. At the moment, we're only doing it off site at the landfill. We also want to prevent landfill or backfill. So presently we've diverted about 150,000 tons of concrete waste from landfill to date over the past 2 years. Obviously it keeps material in the loop, so you don't lose its embodied carbon from the concrete. It reduces the need for primary extraction and all the associated impacts with that quarrying has, so biodiversity loss or groundwater impacts and transport emissions. We can supply recycled material back to the waste producer, which is really good for green credentials in terms of LEED and BREEAM, and it's those circular initiatives. It also reduces transport costs. So down in the bottom right is Dublin Airport taxiway extension, which happened last summer. And what we did there is we took the concrete waste concrete from a different part of the job, and then in the same truck we supplied them back with the recycled 6F2. So the truck emissions were cut in half, as well as the emissions associated with producing the virgin stone. And then we have a fully certified recycled material for use in roads and civils projects, as Martha explained. So on the left is the end of waste process, which is come from the UK RAP protocol, and this is our one on the right. But the one on the left, basically, you take in your waste, you process it, sample and test it under quality protocols, and if it doesn't pass the tests, either the product tests or the end of waste tests, so the environmental leachate tests, it still becomes a waste, and we have to treat it as such within the landfill. So we had an occasion last year where material that was crushed was too oversized, and that failed. So we couldn't, it wasn't be allowed to be treated as a product, and still became a waste. So we had to reprocess and retest it before it could be certified as a product. And then once it meets that bar, then we have product delivery documentation, which is declarations of performance and supply tickets, which show the certified product. So on the right then is just a schematic of our process, which is intake of material, pre-sort, crush and remove any contaminants, and then sort the material into various sizes, test it for both the leachate limits that Martha described and the product specification requirements, and then it becomes recycled, and so it all continues on. So I'm going to try and share a video here, if you bear with me, because it kind of shows it in reality. So bear with me there. Is that coming up there now?
Yep, I can see it.
Yeah.
Good.
I'd say there won't be any sound, but anyway, you'll get the idea. So hopefully that kind of gave you a view of the material coming in and going through the process. So it uses some, is that back to the presentation there now? Yeah, so we use a specialist crusher, but other than that, it's normal quarrying equipment, I suppose. So the first stage is waste acceptance. So this is the ideal material that we take in, kind of this is an old concrete yard. We take in material from local authorities, their paving material, off-cut of piles, and then kind of slabs of material as well. So it's a single stream 170101 concrete is what we're dealing with in our end of waste. So waste acceptance is all governed under a license. So there's procedures that are set out in any waste permission. So the end of waste decision allows it to be under any waste permission. So it could be a waste facility permit or a cert of reg, which gives it mobility. But at the moment we're working on a couple of those projects around the country, but primarily we're in Dublin. There is waste characterization, which is required by the customer. So basically they have to define that they have a single stream concrete and it's uncontaminated, free from asbestos, and it must be free from physical contaminants. So timber and plastics have to be removed. We then visit the site and then we do on-site verification of each load that comes in. So you'd see in the video that when a truck goes on the weighbridge, there's cameras and it's videoed, and you check that it is what it should be, and then we also inspect it when it gets tipped out. And then if it isn't, if there's too much contamination in it, it just gets sent down the other road into the landfill, or it gets rejected at site and goes back to the site of origin. So really input must be of high quality to ensure that we have a high quality product. Let's just picture the process. And like I said, this is a Gipo crusher from Switzerland, which is specially designed to deal with concrete and rebar that might be in it. And then this is a normal crushing plant, screening plant, which if we're making a single size product, it splits out the feed into the various different sizes. Then we have to do sampling and testing. So we've documented procedures under our factory production control manual. So Martha touched on that. So it's a bit that kind of backs onto the waste permission. So the waste permission deals with all the incoming materials, and then the factory production control, it kind of backs onto that about how we produce the material and test it after. So the frequency and type of testing is defined by the product standards. In our case, it's TII standards or customer requirements if there's a bespoke spec. Usually the testing is physical, which is the grading of the material, and then also chemical. And Roisin was saying how environmental protection, which was the bulk of our end of waste application, and Martha's talk. So the outcome of that was that our aggregates have to meet not only the product standard, but the environmental protection leachate limits as well. We then have to have all this documented and provide evidence for audit. So we have, by virtue of the end of waste decision, we're into System 2+ of construction product regs. So it's the standard for aggregate production, and usually on the products that we're making, if you were making them in a virgin quarry, you wouldn't have to go down the System 2+. You could do a System 4, which is a lot less onerous. But because it's a higher risk feedstock, I suppose this gives an extra level of quality control before materials go out into the market. But this, I suppose, while it's good for environmental protection and confirmation of the processes, it does add an extra cost. So it's difficult when we're competing with the same type product from a virgin quarry, which wouldn't have to go through the same level of testing. So we end up with a certified product. The end of waste allows for bound and unbound use. At the moment, we're just using unbound use. So we have NSAI certification for 600 and 800 materials. So that's 6F2, 803, and then we have just about got 500 series, but the TII spec needs to be updated to allow accommodate recycled materials in their entirety. Then we can also use it in bound applications. We haven't gone down the certification route yet. We're still doing testing, so we're currently trialing and making concrete with low energy bound binder, so GGBS, and it would be suitable for low strength concrete. So we're doing trials on mixes that are both batched traditionally and then batched for roller compacted concrete. So Roisin touched on the high bar, and I suppose these are some of the agencies that we have to interact with when you're turning a waste into a product. So in terms of, I suppose, standards, the waste generator, there are, at the moment, there's fewer or no recycling requirements. So a person who is generating concrete waste isn't really obliged or incentivized to recycle their material. They may want to get it recovered, but they can do that via backfill. So that's one of the issues which I'll come back to. Obviously, I talked about the waste permit, which deals with how we handle the waste and the emissions from the activity of actually processing it, so dust and noise and that. And then the end of waste decision, which sets additional requirements on the leachate limits, and requires the third-party certification, which is conducted from the NSAI, which come in annually to audit us. Then we have our specification. So TII is the main one we use in Ireland. Some of the clauses allow for recycled materials, some don't, and some of the clauses that don't in Europe would allow recycled materials. So there's a big job of work to be done for specifiers to see where recycled materials fit in. Obviously, they're not going to be suitable for everywhere, but there's definitely a place for them, and other countries have shown that. And then we also have an EPD on the product, so we've carried out life cycle assessment and got an EPD on it. So that was carried out by Eco Review, following the standards for LCA. It was independently verified and showed that we have a carbon equivalent footprint of 0.2 kilograms per ton, which is a lot less than some of the studies done on virgin aggregate. It's about 95% less than some virgin aggregates. And obviously carbon counting, you have to look at transport, so there's no point in having a low carbon aggregate that's transported to Clare. Like, you're better off from a carbon point of view using a local source if you can. But if it's in the Dublin area, you can have a very significant savings on emissions and truck movements as well. And the hope is that we can carry out the end of waste certified process on third-party sites. So some areas for improvement, I suppose, is poor quality concrete waste. So these are, I suppose, some of the material that you see on sites that the segregation doesn't happen, and they just knock a building, and at that stage, it's the effort and costs of taking the concrete out and separating out of the contaminants is too late. So that material ends up in the bottom picture, I suppose, which is just a backfill of all that material gone into a hole, and really that takes it out of circulation, and there's also a pollutant potential from it, but it's still recovered. It's still classed as recovery in some councils. Some council areas, they allow that material to be backfilled, and other ones they don't. So there's a bit of inconsistency in regulation and enforcement. So there are some operators producing aggregates, and they have been for years without product certification or end of waste. And sometimes it goes down the Article 27 route. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. There's different views in different jurisdictions, as I mentioned. And then there are some unregulated activities, which leads to poor quality aggregates. And that has resulted in recycled products having a poor reputation for some specifiers. So I suppose as the bar is lifted, then the reputation should lift as well. There needs to be expanded uses. So, like I said, some TII specifications don't accommodate recycled materials fully. And I suppose together the information, trials and collaborations are needed. So it'll give people the evidence and specifiers the comfort to use the materials. And then in terms of circular business model, there's a lot of initial investment in time. So as Roisin was saying, like there's obviously a lot of applications in, and there's a lot of cost and work that goes into them. I suppose we didn't start off with a company specific one, but the more I learned about end of waste, like there's only about 4 national decisions across Europe already. So it is a difficult area for regulators to have comfort that material is going to be fit for purpose when it goes out again. So some countries have opted for not having any national decisions, and others keep it specific with licensed operators to ensure the controls are there on the products. So we're obviously competing with cheaper, less fussy outlets. So some outlets wouldn't mind if there was contamination in it, like timber or brick or plastic, because it's not going for recycling, it's just going for backfill. So sometimes it can be a struggle for our customers to say, look, if you want to recycle, you need to prepare it in such a way. There's no incentive or requirements for waste producers to recycle their materials. And on some of the lead programs, they rank recovery backfill the same as recycling, which clearly it isn't in terms of an environmental point of view. And obviously in Ireland, we're blessed with a lot of quarries and there's an abundance of cheap aggregates. So it's another thing that we're competing with. So I suppose the mechanisms for improvement can be kind of put into 3 different categories. So there's a waste generator, a developer. So if there's producer responsibility where they should make the material for recycle, then that'll help. And the new EPA construction waste guidelines kind of go some way to improving that. That could be bolstered by planning conditions or the resource management plans, which are the new C&D waste management plans. Material tracking from projects. So if you do a pre-demolition audit and know exactly what you're dealing with in your waste, then you'll be able to say, right, well, I have 10,000 tons of concrete. If I treat it in such a way and do selective demolition, then that material will be able to be processed, and you can track it through from the site through to its recycling and then back out to where it went in as a product. Then there's the recycler. So end the waste obviously takes time and money, which is has to be done, I suppose, to make sure that the process is going to lead to a quality product. Obviously, recyclers have to then think about product liability and certification, because you're moving into a new realm of product supply, which falls under a different set of liabilities. And then obviously, when you're recycling something, you want to reduce the amount of waste. So if you're processing concrete and you're only able to use 50% of what you process, it becomes less economically viable. So you have to look for as much uses and high value uses for your products that that you can. Enforcement, I suppose, plays a big role over the waste generator and the recycler, you know, to make a level playing field. So because it is such a high bar, and it needs to be a high bar, if people can do it without going through all these steps, either through an end of waste, through a byproduct declaration, or just doing it without any environmental controls, they could make a material that fits the 6F2 size, but won't have any environmental checks or balances on it. And that will really stunt recycling and circular economy, in my view, for the country, because it has to be a level playing field in terms of all the materials being produced to a high standard. And then in terms of the user, if people or specifiers say, look, you have to look at secondary materials, and if they're available and they're fit for purpose, then there should be a requirement for using them. So that's where green procurement comes in. And there are talks through the Waste Action Plan and Circular Economy Bill, which Roisin mentioned, that those things will come into fore in the next few years. The whole life carbon of a material or a project needs to be looked at. So if you're building a road or a bridge, then look at all the different components that go into it and see what the carbon footprint of the job is and how to reduce it. Materials tracking, and then looking at the first, second, third life impacts of a material that's put out on a market. So if you're building a building to see, well, how would you then, when it comes to the end of its life, make it recyclable again, or if paving is probably more applicable, where it has a set design life, and then obviously the user then becomes the waste producer, and so the circle continues. So next steps, I suppose, the EPA best practice guidelines we're out for consultation in May, I think. So it'll be great when they're on, because they come on, because they really help, I suppose, people thinking that from a design stage how to deal with their waste materials and reduce them, and if where they can't reduce them, then see if they can recycle them. Specification reviews are underway, and then trials and data collection and collaboration. So we're always open to collaborating with projects who are interested in reducing waste or using some of these recycled materials in them, and seeing what can be done. And it's, while it might be new in Ireland, it has been done in a lot of other countries, so it's not massively new. There is a lot of other waste that could go down the end of waste route. I think soil and stone, rubble, bitumen, insulation, or glass, provided that they meet all those tests and pillars from the regulations. And environmental risk assessment is very important, because no one should be putting out a product that is going to be a liability in years to come. There's additional product types, so not, I suppose, taking concrete and making it into a 6F2. It's downcycling. I suppose you're taking something that's high value and making it into something that's low value in a way, but it's better than nothing, but it can be definitely put up the hierarchy. So that's where new concrete from old concrete is really where we're looking at. There's obviously the National End of Waste Working Group, so they're looking at different materials and how a national waste will end of waste might look. And then there's the NSAI Circular Economy Working Group, which is looking at it from European level about having harmonized standards for recycled materials. So part of the Green Deal, the European agencies are all looking at how best to accommodate these secondary materials, and then that'll end with green procurement, where hopefully people will be incentivized or will look at buying the materials. So that's everything for me. Thanks very much for listening, and sorry for running over there.
Thanks very much, Cian. No, I think it was well worth it. And thanks to Roisin and Mark as well. I think it's I found it very interesting. Anyway, I think it's unusual to go to these presentations and see such a kind of a complete narrative from initial kind of concept inception through to its implementation in practice in the construction centres. I think that was really, really good, and it kind of grounded the whole topic of end of waste and circular economy there into something that's tangible, and that's I suppose readily available in the market as a product. So well done to everyone involved. It was a really, really great achievement. I'm going to throw it open to Q&A at the moment. So if see, there's one or two questions in there at the moment. So if we want to have a think about what they'd like to ask our panelists, take a couple of minutes, and I'll take the opportunity just to highlight a couple of things that Simon have planned, what's from HQ and with the Republic of Ireland branch as well. So there's a number of events coming up in July and for the rest of the year as well, which you'll find on the CIWAM website, ciwam.org/events. The AGM is coming up in July, and Barbara might be able to give a specific date for that. I should know it, but I don't have it to hand. The Republic of Ireland branch as well is continuing its series on sustainable issues for Ireland with respect to climate action, and details of our next talks are coming up. I think in August we have one planned, and then after kind of towards the autumn winter. But details of all our upcoming events are published on, as I said, both CIWAM's website, but also on our social media channels. So be sure to stay in touch through LinkedIn at both CIWAM HQ and also the Republic of Ireland branch. If I've forgotten anything, Barbara, I'm sure we'll jump in at the very end. But I think, conscious of time, we'll move on with a couple of questions.
I put all the links in the chat.
Yeah, sorry, you did, Barbara. Yeah, at the outset I saw that. So links to any of the event pages or upcoming sessions are there, I think, in the first couple of comments on the chat page. So thanks for that, Barbara. Yeah, look, there's a couple of questions in there at the moment. The first one, again, probably directed at Cian, and it's, do you have any allowance for other construction materials such as sand? And if so, what's the percentage accepted? So I think that's information from
So we only can take in 170101 for recycling the single stream concrete. Sometimes you would get some fines in it or a little bit of clay. So the recycler crusher has a waste belt or a scalping belt. So if there is material in it, it gets put off the side. It doesn't end up in the product. So we don't, like, you have to keep contamination to a minimum. So like sometimes we get, if you've seen Kelly blocks and they have a bit of wood cast into it, like that could go in there. And when it goes through the crusher, it turns into a toothpick. So a 2x4 becomes thousands a little bit. So, and why we're allowed it from the product spec point of view and from the end of waste decision, it doesn't look good. And anything we could do to make the material look and perform good, we do. So we have to keep it out as best we can. So we don't, like, there's allowances on material coming in, and there's a certain allowance on it going out, but sand wouldn't be one of them. I suppose you would get fines and stuff, but really our main aim is that it is kept out at source segregation. So getting the demolition contractor to do as best they can to keep it separate.
I suppose on that question for myself, in relation to maintaining kind of consistent quality with the product at the end, and you're obviously taking in waste products from various different sources, which may vary in terms of the quality or the makeup and mix of that concrete. Do you see is there any trade-off between the quality of the recycled aggregate versus aggregate from a virgin source, for example, and is there any, I mean, what's the kind of compare and contrast between the two? Is there any in terms of quality consistency?
Well, I suppose the quality consistency, in order for us to achieve it, we have to do all the checks and balances consistently. So, like there would be a difference if we let I don't know, a batch of poor concrete or a batch of bricks in, that would, you know, take the quality of it. So to keep the quality assurance high, we have to take samples. So we have to take samples of every 50 hours of production and every month for a leachate. And then we have constantly checks. So we have checks on the weighbridge and checks then in the concrete processing area. So there's a lot more work put in to ensure that the quality is as good as as virgin material. So from a, like, you're not going to make high grade PSV stone from recycled materials. It won't be there. Like, it doesn't have the strength capabilities of virgin stone, but it does definitely meet our requirements. So, and we've done over and above testing that you would for a 6F2 material to make sure that it does meet the bar of strength and the requirements of it. So it's kind of horses for courses, that you have to have materials that are fit for purpose.
And David asks, what are the general benefits, I suppose, with being certified with respect to end of waste?
Well, if you're not certified, then people wouldn't be buying your materials or shouldn't be buying your materials. So I suppose the benefits are that you have a market and that you're doing things as per the regulations and as you should be. So yeah, otherwise you're working outside a certified system, which is not great, or it's not something we'd be into doing, I suppose. So benefits are having a good product that you can sell.
Yeah, just to support Keane there, what he was saying, if you're taking in waste and selling it off as a product, as I said before, it's here and it's here to stay, end of waste. And I know it's a relatively new thing coming in, and recycled aggregate has been present for years and years, and it's been operating that way, but you can see the time and the effort and the finance that goes into getting an end of waste decision for good reason. And what IMS are doing, it's not, it can't be undermined in the future by taking in the same material, not to the same spec, and selling it off as Keane says, as cheap and not fussy at times.
I suppose from the customer's perspective, people who are buying aggregate, we alluded to it already, that it's not entirely commercially palatable to, when you compare it with virgin sources. How do you think, and maybe this is one for Roisin, how do you think that customers can be incentivized to begin to use recycled aggregate products? Is the answer, does it lie in legislation in terms of enforcing a move or an entire switch or transformational change, if you like, in the construction sector to move or to enforce a switch to a circular approach? Your mic is muted, Roisin.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's a couple of factors there, and Keane touched on it, in that enforcement might vary slightly across the country and across Europe as well. But I think that will change with time. I think with the circular economy bill coming through, there is facilities there for introducing levies in time, where there might be a levy on virgin aggregate as well, to buy from a commercial perspective. So it's stitched into legislation going forward. So I think there will be incentives put in there. I'm not sure if Keane might want to add anything to it.
Yeah, like there's different carton sticks, I suppose, that have been used in different countries. So in the UK, they have aggregate tax or levies. People don't like hearing levies or taxes, but like really, what would help is I suppose is a level playing field, so that if people are making materials that they should be certified. And I think that what they've done in the Netherlands, I suppose, they've looked at natural materials and recycled materials and said they all have to be undergoing this testing. So like I said, if a quarry down the road from us was making 6F2, they wouldn't have to go to near the amount of testing that we would. So it adds on, I don't know, say €1 per ton or 50 cents per ton, but the margins are so tight in making materials, and particularly waste materials, where you'd have to do a lot more checks and processing that. If you're only going to look at cost, then recycled materials are on a very poor footing, both in terms of people wanting to send their material for recycling. Like they could send it to a waste facility permit down the country for a cheaper gate fee than they could send it to us, because they just stick it in a hole and cover it over, and that's it. And then they can buy materials for a cheaper bit. So it does have to, there has to be some kind of incentivize, or even if on public projects that, I don't know, Metro North or roads jobs, that they would say that you have to consider recycled materials, or you have to use a minimum of 30%. So it's not quite forcing people to use materials. It's just that they have to consider it. So at the moment, we're kind of at the mercy of people wanting to do the right thing. So big multinationals who would develop data centers or offices in other countries and go, well, we want to recycle material and we want to use it and we want to reduce carbon, and cost isn't our number one driver. And so it's really about looking at overall value, so carbon value, and not looking at the cheapest outlet. So those are the things that would help green procurement, I think, and level playing field.
Yeah. And then I think lastly, moving away from the construction sector, I think, Roisin, you mentioned 43 applications at the moment, 19 of which were related to the construction aggregate sector, if you like. What other sectors are you seeing movement in? I suppose from my own perspective, particular interest in wastewater and the applications of wastewater sludge as a high value product, and the constituents of it as a high value product more specifically. What are you seeing from sectors of construction or traditional construction?
When you go past the 19 aggregate applications, we've just done one for a critical raw material. I think it was calcium fluoride as well, and I think it originated from Intel from a production process there. So lots of variety in terms of recycled wood as well, recycled wood briquettes we've just processed. We're kind of going through that decision process there that I would have showed you on the slide. We have had some applications in for sludges from wastewater, and it's not an area I work in particularly, but some of them have been withdrawn just from engagement with themselves in terms of they may have actually been exempt from being a waste in the first place, or it could go straight to organic fertilizer, etc. So it's always quite helpful to have that pre-application meeting as well. It might save some trouble, but again, it's resources to go in and do an initial assessment of that application. And if you can batch them together in any way, it's always helpful. So we have had some engagement with Irish Water, and some applications have been withdrawn as not having to go down that route.
Okay. One last question here from David again. Other than construction materials, part of that response, but other than construction materials, what is the scenario for customer products such as electronic products, plastic products on the circular economy? So in terms of, I suppose, the process of implementing end of waste for other consumer related products, if you like, or products you would see in either domestic or industrial markets.
Sorry, Jerry, I can't quite hear you there.
I think the question is in relation to applying the end of waste, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, applying the end of waste process, the certification process, to other products outside of the construction sector, which I kind of think you might have touched on in the previous, as part of the previous response. He gives examples such as electronic products, plastic, and others.
Yeah,
I mean, it's more or less it would be the same in principle.
Yeah, two of the end of waste decisions have been for plastic materials.
Okay. Yeah, I think that kind of brings us to a fairly natural conclusion there. All that's left to do is just, I suppose, thank Barbara and Jane for all the work they do in the background at CIWEM HQ in helping to bring these events to life. You do kind of control work there in helping each of the branches along. Obviously, the participants for taking the time out today out of their busy schedules, Roisin, Martha, and Keane. I mean, without you guys, these events don't happen. And as I said, it's today's one I think was really useful in terms of telling a story from beginning to end, so to speak. And certainly as someone who doesn't come from traditional civil engineering background or construction background, it's found it very, very informative. And lastly, to those of you who took the time out of your schedules to log on and to register for the event, and hopefully everyone who attended got something from it, learned something from it. And at the end of the day, that's what these sessions are about. They're about knowledge sharing and learning opportunities, and hopefully giving you something of interest outside of the day job. So with that, I'll draw the event to a close, and unless there's any comments from Barbara at HQ or any one of our panelists as a final sign off, I think we'll end it there and look forward to seeing you at the next one.
I'd like to thank the branch and also to our speakers this evening. It's been very informative, and thank you very much.
Thanks, bye.
Yeah,
Thanks a
you,
million.
everyone.
You're just dipping in out there, Dara, at the end there. Sorry, but thanks a million.
All the best. Bye bye.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye.
Keep safe and well. Bye.